First of all, thank you very much to Queen's University and the Canadian Armed Forces, and also especially to Steph for this invite. It's been a long journey, not just through the gender space, but certainly to get here. I must admit, over the last couple of days, I've relied on Sarah to translate for me. You speak very fast, but I think I've got most of the important points. I empathise, I suppose, first of all, with Dr. Wong. I'm going to walk away here thinking that I'm a pretty poor parent, particularly regards to, you know, I have a captain who lives in my house who's 28. So that's quite difficult at times, and especially because he's in Special Forces. But I must admit, we do let our kids drive when they're 16 because that's probably the best way us as adults can still enjoy a couple of drinks, so we're a little bit ahead. Just in regards to my background, a logistics officer initially, also in education and training. I was a commanding officer of a university regiment. So I haven't always been involved just in the gender space, although I have got a PhD in gender mainstreaming. But I suppose I started the journey in 1999 when I was deployed to a regional assisted operation in the Pacific. Went there as the Chief Logistics Officer. I think I lasted in that job for a week, and the commander came over, tapped me on the shoulder. I was the only female in the contingent, and said, "I need you." And I thought, that's interesting. What do you need me for? And he said, "Oh, you're a female and we've just worked out this is a matrilineal society and we can't negotiate with the females." I'd never ever joined the army to be a female negotiator, but it started an interesting journey. I was seconded by the UN to work predominantly in Africa, in DRC, looking at strategies on how we could educate and train our large troop contributing countries, particularly from Asia, with respect to the broader application of protection of civilians, which include then women and children. And then lo and behold, in 2000, the resolution 1325 came apart. And I must admit it was sort of like this waiting game. I had been posted to the Peace Ops Training Centre, and I know the staff there would have known that this was well ingrained for a long time before it actually hit into our main service areas. So the ADF's obligations, no different to the Canadians, except as far as gender in military operations, we have taken a very broad application. I must admit the challenges of just talking about women, peace and security are predominantly to a very masculine organisation. There were some barriers just in regards to terminology. We don't have the capacity to have gender advisors, child protection advisors, etc., like in the structures of the UN. So we've basically encompassed the broader application of women, peace and security, children affected in armed conflict and the protection of civilians. We have a national action plan and we also have a defence implementation plan. And Canada, you certainly were well ahead of Australia in regards to establishing the national action plan. I think yours was 2010, the US 2011, Australia 2012. But I also emphasise the point that both Iraq and Afghanistan also have a national action plan, Iraq in 2014 and Afghan in 2015. Not all member states, out of the 193 though, as you can see, have national action plans. I'm glad Sarah spoke about diversity and some of the policies and programs you have in place. No doubt Australia has very similar ones, but we have what I see as three broad applications of gender. The first being internal, a lot of the issues that Sarah talked about. but secondly, the sexual misconduct. And I raise this because at the time that we were in particular integrating Security Council Resolution 1325, along came our Sex Discrimination Commissioner, and of course not just at a national level but an international level, the allegations and reports of sexual misconduct. And I'm sure most of you have seen our Chief of Army, who had a very vivid Facebook page, etc., talking about the no tolerance, etc. The reason why I bring that up is because my job of putting 1325 and gender perspectives in operations was very blurred and clouded by the sexual misconduct part, because any time I mentioned that I was a gender advisor, I'd probably got the old crossed arms and, you know, the words, are you here for gender and equity and diversity? And there was quite a barrier initially to get it into our operations. So currently we have service gender advisors. In Navy and Air Force, they tend to sit up at the strategic level and specifically deal with PERS issues. The Chief of Army deliberately pushed me into the ops cell, and a further 6 months later we had a gender advisor in our Joint Operations Command. Our current operations, I was the JTF gender advisor, but I also had other duties, and I actually sat in the J5 cell. I was the J53, and I worked with our task groups in Iraq and Afghanistan, specifically our 632, which was our Special Forces Advisory Team, and one of our infantry units with the support to the Iraq Security Forces. We have a gender advisor in ISAF, predominantly doing capacity building, a completely different function, really not interacting with the military itself. And as of this year, we have a gender advisor in Op-Aslan, which is in UNMISS, and I know that Canada were very keen on rotating with Australia to perform that function. So why is this important for ADF operations? No doubt you have probably seen a very similar screen, but basically the principles of the Security Council resolution itself are recognised worldwide, and we as an ADF are extremely, I suppose, we're not quite there yet, and I'll talk about the challenges in a minute, but we do see the value, particularly in regards to operational effectiveness. So what is a gender advisor? Now this is a bit of a contentious issue, because the doctrine itself, both the UN and NATO, recognise the gender advisor as a specialist advisor. You and I both know that there's a significant difference when we talk about a legal advisor and a policy advisor, someone who's had significant training, 4 to 6 years, and then along comes a gender advisor, and often the credentials are firstly that they're often female. Currently there's a 2-week course in NATO, in the headquarters over in Sweden. I've attended the course. There would be a lot of work on that course for it to meet ADF and, I would presume, Canadian Armed Forces context. And as I said, it's really role specific, and the reason for that is my job is to actually get rid of gender advisors. The main aim is to mainstream it through our operations. I was very fortunate when I was in Iraq to have, at the time, Brigadier Adam Finlay, a Special Forces commander, who was the deputy, and I was basically brought in with the Special Forces advisory team to do a deeper dive in regards to human security operations. And the reason why I say that is there'll be many of you in the audience, alike Australia, who believe that we have predominantly been including gender in our operations for a long time. That certainly is the case. However, I could give you some very specific examples of where, through a deeper gender analysis, some of the tasks in Iraq, particularly connected to Mosul, included a very deep dive in gender analysis, and it certainly improved our capability. Where the gender advisor sits, I know in some countries it tends to sit in the J9 cell, the U2 cell. Australia, we basically see it sitting in a 5 cell, or possibly working direct to the commander. But as you can read from that quote, and that was actually after our interventions in East Timor. The other main part is the reporting side of it, and this was something that we hadn't included in the last couple of rotations, but requirements of the Security Council resolution with children affected in armed conflict, which also includes the child soldier application, is the specific reporting requirements. So once again, in induction training, pre-deployment training, our members were advised of what the mandatory reporting requirements are. And this was not just for obviously the human rights, the legal framework situation, but it also provided our commanders and also our members with a greater legitimacy for why we were operating in Iraq itself. Sexual exploitation and abuse, that specific term is related to our UN operations, and I'm sure in recent times you've been aware that the force commander in South Sudan was actually sacked, and another commander, or not a commander, the head of mission in the Central African Republic was removed from his position due to their inadequacies in regards to the protection of the population. This is probably one I would like to leave with you, some of the challenges. I thought being a logistics officer was hard, but coming in as a gender advisor, I think you're at the lowest end of the pecking order until people can understand what the actual role is. And the first challenge is, as I mentioned, was the release of the Security Council resolution, the National Action Plan, and on the other hand, the equity, diversity, the sexual misconduct. And I must admit, if I walk into a room and say to people I'm a gender advisor, I nearly always get attacked. In fact, I got attacked yesterday. The person's not here. I'm not quite sure whether that's coincidental or not. In regards to, you know, they thought this is all about women. They thought that gender in operations was all about, you know, another way to increase women in leadership positions, increase women's participation, etc. And I had to remind the person that, you know, that's up to the commander how he or she deals with the problems in the area of operations. That the intent of the gender advisor was to advise the commander on specifically the protection and prevention of a disproportionate group, particularly women and children. I think the other issue is the mandatory training part. Once again, as soon as we try and integrate it into our education and training, people try and push us over into the PERS space or into the mandatory training. And as I said, the aim is to integrate it right across the curriculum, whether it be in PERS, OPS, etc. Where do I think Australia's at? I think we're still sitting in that extrinsic driven side of it, driven by policies and directives. I think the senior leadership get it, and I think at the operational and tactical level, particularly our junior people, I think they get it. But if I ask even our Canadian friends, US friends, it seems to be in this middle management where there seems to be a lot of resistance. And I'm not quite sure why that is the case. From my personal experience, it's about the misunderstanding of the intent of gender in operations. The application is also an interesting one. Most people are very happy to put it into stabilisation, HADR, but when we talk about phase 1, 2 and 3, there's this reluctance that it doesn't fit, and I'm sure the General and our advanced forces know that it's a very important part of the operations. The Gender Advisor Network's an interesting one, and I'll say that because it's obviously attracted the converted, predominantly female and often without an ops background. So sometimes that can also be an impedance or a barrier to integration as well. So our thoughts still are that the gender mainstreaming is the preferred action, but at the moment we have gender advisors to ensure that it's actually included in our planning and conduct of operations. But it certainly causes that issue of, you know, the gender advisor network actually inadvertently takes the responsibility away from the organisation itself. And last up, something that Steph and I are very keen to work on is how do we measure the effectiveness of including gender in operations? How do we measure performance? At the moment we tend to just keep on using numbers as in the percentage of women deployed, etc., and that actually isn't the bottom line. And gender fatigue. I just hope that that doesn't once again impede the integration. And my last point is that this has got to be, you know, a leadership issue. And as I said, we seem to get it right up the top, but there's this middle Major Lieutenant Colonel that I'm just not quite sure what the issue is. That's my honest approach to this. Okay, thank you very much, and I look forward to any questions. Thank you.